Hi, and welcome to Matt Holman Talks Mental Health, the podcast where I have the great opportunity to catch up and chat with amazing humans. For this episode, I'm so happy to introduce Matt Crawford to the conversation. Welcome, Matt.
Hi.
Hello there. So, as I always do, just a very quick introduction from me. This is part of the Podathon Festival of 24 hours of 24 recordings, and Matt's episode number 7. So happy to have him here. Matt and I have known each other for a number of years through the work we did with the same company, actually, a company called BCD Travel, when I was there many moons ago. And Matt has just been somebody who also attended one of my trainings at one point when I left and came back as a mental health instructor. And it was just lovely to catch up and have a conversation about mental health and talk openly about some of the things that were going on. So I'm not going to steal any thunder, Matt. I'll let you do a proper introduction to yourself, but welcome. Really pleased to have you here.
Great. Thanks, Matt. I'm Matt Crawford. I've worked in the travel industry for what is now, I'm in my 35th year actually.
Wow.
And someone described me as a veteran recently, so I don't know quite what I think of that, but that's where I am. Worked in lots of areas of the travel industry, but in the corporate world, with corporate travel, and usually with specialist verticals. So I spent a lot of time working with the entertainment and media community. I've been married 28 years. I can't even say I've got 2 teenagers anymore. I've got 2 young adults that they're 20 and 22. So, and I have a volunteering career running alongside, but I know I'll get opportunity to talk a bit about that later on.
Oh, we definitely will. We'll get into that a little bit later. But as always with these, the big question really is, it's your time to tell your story, really. Just a bit about your story, your journey with mental health. That's what this is all about. And you tell us whatever you feel comfortable telling us, Matt. So, what's happened? What's your journey?
Well, I think it's fair to say that probably even since I was a kid, I would say that I've always suffered with a degree of anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
So people don't always realise until they really get to know me, but I am a little bit of a worrier. But I've never felt, and I'll come on to a bit later on about when that got out of control, but on the whole, it's something I've always been able to manage. I've always kind of felt that a bit of good stress is quite good. I think I'm someone who has a lot of adrenaline. It's always been there. I've always worked in a relatively sort of what I think high pressured environment. Travel isn't all glamour. It can it can be very stressful, particularly in the corporate world, and particularly when I was the travel agent, and you've got to react to things very, very quickly. And I always really got a buzz out of that and that degree of adrenaline. And I don't think work ever caused me a huge amount of anxiety. I mean, it's probably fair to say that over the years, I've had situations that have caused me sleepless nights. There have been particularly difficult clients. You work in the corporate world, you meet some people who are not all lovely, and that can cause you anxiety. But I've always met those people kind of with fortitude, and usually always managed to find a way through things. Always had large teams, staff. That causes anxiety a lot of the time, but it's that was part and parcel of it. I think my anxiety has really peaked when it's things of a personal nature. So, and we all go through those things, whether that's house moves, bereavement, family illness, those are the things that, where my anxiety has really peaked. And probably when I was in my mid-20s, I did have my first experience of counselling, because a lot of things had happened in quite short succession, and I think what had happened was I was starting to get overwhelmed, and I couldn't order what had happened, and I found that really, really, really helpful, even though I cancelled going to the appointment about 3 times before I eventually went, because I think you're talking about the mid-90s. I was still quite young, and I probably felt there was a bit of stigma around that, but I never looked back. And over the years, I've always used counselling when I felt that I've needed it, in the same way that I swim a lot, I get a lot of ear infections. When I think I'm getting an ear infection, I go and get antibiotics. And I've always treated counselling in very much the same way. I'm not always great at talking about it when it's happening. So I'm somebody who's actually often better when I'm starting to process things. And what I've found is that once I've got it all off my chest, it's like there's a huge release from that, and then I can move on again. So, and I've had counselling probably, I don't know, 6, 7 times. I'm talking in terms of a series of sessions,
Yeah, of course, yeah.
over the years, and I found that particularly helpful. I've never suffered with depression, and I really feel for people that do. I think if I've had any kind of lows, it's been completely reactive. It's been because of something that has happened.
Right.
I'm not it's a clinical thing where you just wake up in the morning and you don't know why. I can usually pinpoint what that thing is. But what I wanted to say is that I had an experience nearly 5 years ago when I realized the hard way what happens when anxiety can really peak and really get out of hand. And I think it's really important that we recognize. I certainly would probably recognize now if that was happening again. But I'd started a new job. I'd been with my previous employer for, our mutual employer, Matt, for a lot of years. I was very happy there. I'd been headhunted for a job, was made an offer that I really couldn't refuse. And I took a job which I thought was really the right job and the way forward. So as I got into year 3 of that job, there was a lot of pressure. There were a lot of things going on in that business. There were lots of things changing. There were certain things the business didn't have that clients were then getting quite fidgety. I was responsible for clients and client retention, and I could feel that pressure really starting to build. I have to say, I'd had 2 very long tenures with employers before where I'd worked in a very collaborative environment, in a senior management team. That wasn't my experience this time around. I felt very, very alone in that team, really. And also there was something that was going on in my own family unit that was kept very much to ourselves at the time, and I knew it was going to bring about a lot of anxiety, a lot of angst, and a lot of change. So I think that this pressure was building without me really realizing what was really happening. And it's really weird because if I think about it, at that time I must have been getting really exhausted because I kept daydreaming about being under a duvet. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I think I just felt so tired. I think I was starting to feel really, really tired, and my whole life seemed very, very full on. And there was an incident. I got called in to see a client who wasn't very happy with one of my own team members I took in with me.
Yeah.
And all that I can say without going into any detail is that the client behaved in a really inappropriate way. Right. And in terms of behavior, and he wasn't happy. I can tell you that now. And I kind of did take the blame for something that someone else was kind of responsible for, because ultimately I was accountable. I was in the senior role and I did that, and I took the brunt of that. Yeah. And I walked out of that office and I just felt in a blind panic. Now, I've never felt like that before. I've never honestly ever felt frightened of anybody before. It's just not something that I've always sort of taken bullies head on and all the rest of it. And it was really weird. And I felt really awful. I felt very out of control, and it just continued. I had to go back in and see that customer again a few days later, and I can remember crossing the road, a really busy main road in London, to go into this client, and I remember standing on an island and a motorbike was coming towards me, and I felt my foot keep going off of I actually felt that, and it was getting closer. Now, I've never had a suicidal thought before, and I wasn't having one then either. But I actually thought if I stepped out and stepped in front of this motorbike, it would allow me to have a pause.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Because I didn't think it would kill me. No. But I thought something would happen. And I thought, you know what? Everyone would understand. I can just have a break then, because I'll probably end up in hospital. And it all, and I've never felt like that before or since. And even when I look back at that now, I can't believe that I had that thought. It's so out of my character. But that was how I felt at that time. I didn't want to go back in, didn't want to see this person. In the days that followed, I started to become really unwell. I was sweating profusely. I felt really sick, and I was sick. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. And ultimately, I'm sorry to say it, but I'm being honest, I couldn't pee either. And I was really, really emotional. I burst into tears at work, which I've never done in my career. Not because I've held it back, but purely because I've just never felt unhappy enough. I have cried at work when people have told me really sad stories or things that have happened. Don't say it, but it's never been work related. And I just felt dreadful, to the point that I did go to my GP, and I was surprised by what she said. When I told her the detail of what had happened, she said, you're in extreme shock. Your body's actually gone into shock over what you witnessed. And she put me on beta blockers, and actually over the next couple of weeks it reversed all of those systems, because basically when you go into shock it really affects your adrenal system.
Of course,
and I'd lost nearly a stone in that week, as well. I mean, it just really made me realize what happens when you go into a really severe anxious state. But then added on to that, about 2 days later, I bent down to put a cup of coffee on the coffee table at home, and it was like a thunderbolt had gone through me. I shot back across the room, and I had this most horrendous pain across my back, and all down my right leg. I'll never know to this day whether it was a result of my body just not coping at that point or not. It could have been coincidental, but I'd had spinal surgery in 2005, and I'd had a severe back problem for about 10 years before that. So I then had the anxiety of them thinking that I was back where I was. So I just felt as if everything was really just closing in on me. It was the most awful state to be in. And I was then off work for weeks because I completely lost the reflex below my knee. I could hardly stand, really struggling to walk. I was in agony, and that went on for weeks. I had multiple scans, and unfortunately, one of my discs higher up in my spine had slipped into a really awkward position. I had to go and see a neurosurgeon because of the problem I was having with sensation and everything. And they said that, ultimately I would probably have to have another major surgery. So I was just in such a physical and mental mess, really just not with it a lot of the time. I have to say, and I can't say this for sure, I don't think my employer believed me. Which just added to that stress as well, even though there was all of the documentation to prove it. And actually, it was sad reading when I read the report from the orthopedic surgeon. He actually said that I was partially disabled at that point. So I was really scared, of what my future might look like. But anyway, fast forward. I did want to go back to work. I was worried about my job. One of my kids was due to be going off to uni in September. You worry about all this stuff. You've got your mortgage, and everything was piling up. What ultimately happened was that I didn't return to that employer, which then led to more stress. It was tough. My eldest went off to uni. That was tough. There was all this stuff going on. But what I did find was actually being sort of free of certain concerns, particularly with the employer, was that I actually did start to feel a bit better. And I'd started counselling. So I was able to, go through stuff, which really, really helped. And I needed to get back to work. I was really lucky. My former employer, BCD, I could be really open with, because with the employer that I was at, the stuff that was going on in my private life, which was a huge factor now when I look back, I just would not tell them, because that level of trust just wasn't there. I was very open with BCD, and I was lucky. I just went back on a 6 months contract. It was home based. I was very honest with them that I thought I had to have major surgery again, and all the rest of it. And so I returned, not in the best state. I wasn't in a state to travel. I went back on a job pay grades lower than I'd been on before. I had to walk back through that revolving door, and it was all tough, really, really, really tough. But over time, I started to just feel better. I think the counselling helped. I think being free of an environment that was causing me a lot of pressure helped. Bizarrely, I went for more scans. I had a call one Sunday morning from the neurosurgeon to say, don't really understand what's happened, but I wanted to share this news with you as soon as possible. Your disc is actually going back into place on its own. Whether that was psychological or not, I will never know to this day. I did have to have a few small surgeries, but nothing like it. My confidence was shot to pieces when I went back to work. But gradually over time, with good colleagues, really good colleagues and a lot of support. I'm in my 5th year back now. My 6-month contract just became a permanent one.
Did they realise that you the 6-month contract, you never left? I did that with a client after 12 days.
But ultimately, I my confidence has built over time. I think it's fair to say I never went back to sort of managing people again. I haven't, although I've been promoted a couple of times since, I haven't gone back into a really senior role. I think it made me stop, and I've completely relearn a whole load of new skills. Had a lot more time for other things, home-based role, although I'd still do a lot of traveling and stuff. And actually, I'm quite confident now that that's led to, a sort of a better life, really. But I wanted to share that because it isn't something I've really shared that openly outside of counselling, counselling on my own family unit. But, being under extreme anxiety and shock can really be aware of the signs, and get that help when you need it.
Man, honestly, Matt, fascinating. I'm so thankful that you've made those adjustments, those changes, but it's a sad reality that we have to get to those points to change, isn't it? And to take that moment of sort of, it's a pause moment, isn't it? Like you say, it's going under the blanket sometimes isn't a bad thing, because it gives us a moment to have clarity or pause and think. And I'm so glad that you've managed to do all of that. And thank you for sharing it. I know when we spoke before we recorded that you said you were going to say stuff that you'd never really spoken outside of the counselling route or the therapy. So this is the reality for these conversations. Remember, everybody that's listening, you're hearing stories that are real. You're hearing the real versions of stories that you never normally get to hear. And I just find that fascinating, and just want to say a huge thanks. So what I do want to look at, though, is this change that you've made in the way that you function now, you work, the things that you do, and the support you give to others as well, because it's a really lovely story, and I'm really happy with where you've gone back to. I'm not going to steal your thunder. Tell us all about it.
Well, I actually did start my volunteering career about 10 years ago. So it was actually before this incident. And I knew I wanted to do some sort of volunteering. This was probably about 10, 11 years ago. And I think at the time I worked a lot with the entertainment and media world. They can be demanding. And sometimes you lose a bit of a sense of reality, because everyone's panicking about that hotel room or, having 1A on an airline flight. And I was just looking around for something where I felt that I could use some skills to help people better. I've always really, I feel that I've always listened to people. I realise, benefit of hindsight, there are times I could have done that better. But, at work, I've always been the one, to call someone in, and, when I know they've had a bad time, or they're returning to work for, after a life-changing experience, or which can be anything from having a baby to, losing their mum. Because I've always noticed that huge change in someone from when they, after they've offloaded, and I always feel that if people see that you've listened to them, you might not have previously had a connection with them, but you get one. Most of the time you get one. So like you, Matt, I became a listening Samaritan. Such a privilege, and loved it. And ended up doing lots of other things for Samaritans as well. And the last year that I was there, I joined the prison team, which I never thought, I'd ever want to set foot into a prison. But actually, I was hooked, and very much, privileged to listen to a lot of stories that I'd listened to. And following that, I really decided that I really wanted to work with particularly young offenders within the secure estate, before they were released. And I worked for a great mentoring charity called Trailblazers, and was allocated a number of young guys between 18 and 24 to work with, and I was just astounded listening to a lot of their stories. Tough backgrounds, tough stories. They were in prison for a reason. I'm not there to defend people's cases, but when you look at their histories, it was tough. But what I really found was that after a few sessions, they'd never really had any consistency with someone who just came in and give them unlimited time and listened to them. And actually the power to engage and to encourage them to bring some changes about themselves was phenomenal. So I've spent a number of years working in that environment, which again has been a privilege to do that. I've gone on to sort of work in an extended way with prisoners of all ages and their families and their partners and their kids, and get to hear the story from all angles. But everyone deserves to be listened to. And I just decided to do it voluntarily, just to test the water with a number of charities, to actually train their volunteers to listen. Because what I found when I used to go along to some charities, that as part of their training, they just say to people, listen.
Yeah.
And you can't, because if you're going to become a Samaritan, you have weeks and weeks and weeks of training. So I actually wrote a lot of training on listening skills. I've done some in the corporate environment, which I've done at work. I've done it a lot with people that work with offenders, but also mentoring with young kids and that sort of thing. I've adapted it, for parenting courses. Brilliant. So people listen to children. So because it's so important when we're all listened to, and to see that change when somebody's been able to offload and actually train people not to problem solve for others, not to be sympathetic, not to share your own stories, but actually just encourage people to talk. Even with something as simple as how you're coping, well, that can really set off a conversation. It can make that huge difference. So it's been really interesting. I love it. In November, because it's really hard to work within the prison environment at the moment because of COVID restrictions. So in November, I retrained after a 6-year gap, and I've gone back to being a Samaritans listener. Again, felt very nervous, but to be honest with you, once you've learned those skills, it doesn't take long for it all to come. And I think, sometimes, when people come on the call, they can't speak. They're really struggling to get 2 words together, to actually leave them an hour or so later where they are calmer, they're thinking more rationally, they've got a plan, whatever plan that might be, together. You've helped direct that conversation for people to find their own way and their own solutions. It'll be, forever a privilege. And, I know I'm always going to volunteer, kind of in that sector. So.
Brilliant. Oh, I love it. You give me goosebumps, mate, because I feel that as well. It really is a privilege, isn't it, to listen, and for anybody, listening to this, and becoming a Samaritans volunteer isn't compulsory for anybody, but it does give you an incredible view of the world that you often don't consider, and opening up the world of your own little bubble sometimes can be so inspiring, fascinating, humbling. There's so many different sort of words we could use in there. I'm so glad you come back. I'm so glad you are a Samaritan. You're the perfect person for it, Matt. We are sadly coming to the end of this conversation. Time is just ridiculous today. It's who knows where we're going, but I do want to just say a huge thank you, Matt, for participating in this. And we haven't spoken to each other for a while, but we've just got back together, and the conversation starts flowing. It's easy, really, isn't it? It's not difficult. It's just a conversation between two mates having a chat, chewing over some things that are important conversation topics that we need to cover and address and talk about. How do you feel?
Yeah, good.
You feel all right?
And that's a good question. And I think we should all ask people that question. But the most important thing is, we always hang around for the answer.
Yeah. Are you fit? You do feel good?
Yeah.
I thought I'd ask twice because that's a bit of a theme, isn't it? As Samaritans,
yeah, I do.
Yeah, as Samaritans leaders always say at the end, thank you for being there. And it is really important. And thank you for being here for this conversation. This is going to resonate with so many.
My pleasure.
Any words of wisdom you want to impart before we leave?
I think the only things that I would say is that, you know, if people are struggling, do reach out. Make sure it's someone you know that you can trust. And you know, referrals do take a while, you know, during, you know, through the NHS route or whatever. But you know, Samaritans are always there, and I think people sometimes think that, you know, it's there for people who are really in a terribly desperate state, but Samaritans are there to listen to everybody going through a tough time. And I think just making that initial conversation or calling now and again, you know, if you are waiting for a referral, it will keep you going for that space in between. So please do that.
And you get friendly folk at the end of the phone, just like Matt and I. You know, you may get one of us one day if you do have to call. So yeah, by all means, do feel free to call. As I always close these sessions, just to say Samaritans exist 24/7. You know, there's always somebody at the end of the phone to give it or have a chat with. 116 123 is the number. Yeah, so brilliant stuff. Matt, it's been a blast. Thank you so much for your time and for chatting to me. I really have appreciated it. I'll catch you soon, buddy.
No problem. Thanks, Matt.
Cheers.
Good night.